Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about another Supreme Court case. This is going to be in 1954. It's going to be the case of Hernandez v. Texas. All right, so first of all, what do we know about the Supreme Court so far? Well, so far, this is the third important civil rights case that's come before the Supreme Court. And the Chief Justice during this time is Earl Warren. Earl Warren was Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court, where he presided over the desegregation of California's school system. And then he's going to be appointed by Eisenhower to become Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, where he is going to preside over the Sweatt v. Painter case, the Brown v. Board of Education case, and now this one, Hernandez v. Texas. Okay, so what are the details of the case? First of all, Pete Hernandez was a Mexican-American. He was indicted and then found guilty of murdering another person. And the facts of the case were less important than he argued that the jury, the grand jury that indicted him and the petit jury that convicted him were made entirely of white people. And in fact, as they go in this county that has a lot of Hispanics in it, there had not been a Hispanic on a jury in over 35 years. In fact, it was illegal for Mexican Americans, or as they just called the Mexicans at the time, Mexican Americans to be on a jury in that particular county. And so he argued that this was a violation of his equal protection. The county argued that Mexican Americans are white, and that because they are white, civil rights laws do not apply to them. Okay, so it goes all the way to 1954. It's going to make its way to the Supreme Court. And as I had said, they're going to argue whether or not Hispanics are whites or are they entitled to protection under civil rights laws. All right, and what they're going to have, and this could be another one of those unanimous cases. In other words, all 9 justices are going to argue the same thing. And they're going to argue that while it is true that under our legal framework, Mexican Americans, because Spanish language comes, of course, from Spain, which is in Europe, and Hispanic culture comes largely from Spain, that Mexican Americans, as are all Latin Americans, unless you're Native American Indian, you're white. And so they're going to argue that they're not going to change that. Hispanics are still considered white. On the United States Census, they're going to have a little place for you to fill in your race, and Hispanics are going to be expected to put white. And then under ethnicity or heritage, then they're going to be able to put Hispanic or Mexican or Dominican or Ecuadorian or whatever that national heritage is. And this causes a lot of probably hard feelings and perhaps even some confusion at times, but it is at this point the legal framework under which our country, part of our country, operates. All right, but what about civil rights then? But they are going to come in and they're going to say that Hispanic Americans are still, even though they are white, considered a protected class or a special class. Therefore, the idea of I'm going to use a website called oyes.org. It's a wonderful website for information about past Supreme Court cases, and I really recommend it, especially if you're going to be a teacher. All right, they're going to conclude, and this is straight from Justice Warren's notes here. It is not that the 14th Amendment and, by extension, later civil rights legislation, quote, is not directed solely against discrimination due to a two-class theory, but in this case will cover those of Mexican heritage. In other words, a county, in this case it was Jackson County, cannot have 2 men's toilets, one's unmarked and the other one says hombres aquí, and expect that to be legal. All right, that Mexican Americans were a special class entitled to equal protection under the 14th Amendment. All right, and the importance of this case is that, number one, for Hernandez, is he gets a new trial. And I'm sorry, I don't actually know. I think he was convicted again, but it was a jury of his peers that convicted him. But more important towards civil rights legislation is that it does away with this idea that civil rights only applies to one group of people. Civil rights applies to all groups of people. In other words, the same civil rights that whites have and were being extended to African Americans under the legislation, under these Supreme Court cases, etc., right? Those same civil rights are going to apply to people of Chinese descent, people of Dominican descent, people of Russian descent, Jewish descent, whatever you want to say. Those civil rights under legal framework are going to apply equally to all groups, that there's not going to be just two races, that there actually is going to be, civil rights are going to apply to every American. And so in that sense, the importance and the legacy of Hernandez v. Texas is not actually have a whole lot to do with Hernandez, which is kind of a little bit different because, you know, Brown and Brown v. Board of Education, it directly affected her and her family. They went to a different school, a non-segregated school. Sweat v. Painter, it directly affected Heman Sweat because he went to the University of Texas and became a lawyer. But in the case of Hernandez v. Texas, the legacy of that case is not going to directly affect him because he gets the same outcome, but instead it's going to affect the millions of people in our country that are neither white nor African American, and instead are going to still be able to enjoy their civil rights as what he called a special class. So that's all I have for now. Until then, stay safe, stay well.